Hi there, this is Yannis from Arcweave, continuing with our tutorial on the Arcweave plugin for Godot Game Engine. In this second episode, we'll go through our first example project, a lightweight version of Arcweave's play mode in Godot, and see the plugin's basic functionalities. For this first demo, we will use our interactive fiction example, The Castle. We can download this first example from the plugin's GitHub repo. If we go to Arcweave, GitHub Arcweave page, Godot plugin. Now, we need to go down here to the releases and find the latest release and download the zip file, Arcweave Godot plugin.zip. We can name this Arcweave Godot Play Mode. Now I'll just copy this, I'll just move this inside my Godot folder. So here it is. Now we can open our Godot engine and import this project. Arcweave Godot Play Mode. This example demonstrates how to make a simple game using the Arcweave plugin. Moreover, it features a scene written in GDScript and another one written in C#. Basically, there are the same scenes written in two different languages, so you can study both of them and see how to implement similar patterns and situations. This example demonstrates how to make a simple game using the Arcweave plugin. Moreover, it features the scene, the game, in two different versions, one in GDScript and one in C#, so you can study either of them. So the first thing we need to do is build. And then reload our project. Now let's make sure that the plugin is turned on. And yes, it's enabled, so we can actually run the scene. So as we can see here, we choose which scene we want to run, and then we have a simplified environment similar to Arcweave's original play mode. We have this window here where the text, the content appears, and then we have the option buttons underneath. We don't have any pictures, but we can proceed in our story by clicking our option buttons. Moreover, we can save and load, so I can save. I am now in the artist studio and I can save my game, and then back to Castle Courtyard, follow the path north, walk further down the path, and now if I load the game, I'm back inside the artist studio. Finally, we have two buttons down here. One is to restart the story, so we start from the beginning, and the other one is to refresh the project. But in order to do that, we have to set up our Arcweave asset. So let's have a look at the structure of this project. This is our start scene, and if we go to scenes, we can see that we have our C# and our GDScript scene. So each of these scenes is a control node. It has a story container. The text window is where the text content appears, the options container for the options buttons. Then we have the UI buttons container and our menu button with save and load. And finally, of course, we have our Arcweave node, which is already loaded with the castle project. If we want to update our story, we first need to connect our Godot project with our own version of the castle, as we discussed in the previous episode, either using the JSON file or the Web API. By the way, we will discuss the Web API method in the next episode. We can now have a look at the GDScript version of this example. If we go to our scripts folder, we'll see that we actually have the C# scene script, the GDScript scene, and the GDScript scene but without Arcweave node. This is the one with the Arcweave node. If you want to omit that for any reason and do your own implementation, you can study this script here to see how it can be done. For now, we'll have a look at the GDScript scene, the version with the Arcweave node. So first of all, we have we get several nodes that are necessary for our script as onReady variables. Then in our ready function, the first thing we do is connect several signals. So apart from all the button signals, the menu button, the refresh, the restart button, we also connect the Arcweave node's signal project updated. So if we go to our Arcweave node, in the node tab, we can see that it has its own signal called project updated. Now this signal gets emitted when the Arcweave data is successfully fetched either from file or Web API. Finally, at the end of the ready function, we call the repaint function. This fetches the content of the current element using the story class's method getCurrentRuntimeContent. At the beginning of the story, the current element is, of course, the story's starting element, which is the one we have set in our Arcweave project. So if we go to our castle, this is the current element when the story begins. Then we add the options, and to do that we first delete any previous option buttons, and then using the generateCurrentOptions method of our story class, we get the current options. But what kind of thing is actually our options? Well, if we open our story class script, story CS, let's find this method getCurrentOptions. GenerateCurrentOptions, and we see that it returns the options as well, a class called options. But what is that? Now, this is one of the plugin's helper classes, and we can find all of them in the plugin's project folder in the helper classes file. And as we can see, the first class of the helper classes is options. Now, this is, of course, a C# class, and unfortunately, GDScript does not recognize it as anything other than a generic Godot object. So, in case you want to use static typing for the options, we can only declare that as object. That is the closest we can get to a type. Now, right underneath, we see that the options class has a property called paths. And let's see what this is. Again, if we go to our helper classes script and find our options class, we can see that, yes, the paths is either null or the valid paths. The valid paths is an array of something called path. What is a path? A path is a collection of multiple connections to a target element. Now, to understand what this means, we need to go to Arcweave for a moment and create an element and a connection leading to a target element. Then create another connection leading to a branch with the output leading to a second target element. Then, for example, another branch with an else, and the two outputs lead to one target element each. Now, we need to understand that when we say a collection of connections, we mean connections that are in sequence, not parallel. So the first case here is a path because it's a connection leading somewhere to a target element. The second case is also a path with two connections leading to some eventual target element. And the third case is one path leading to the first target element and the second path leading to the second target element. So this whole thing here is actually two paths. Note that a path does not really need to have a target element to be considered as a path. So if we delete this last connection or this last target element, there is still, well, a potential path, but it's not a valid path. In order for a path to count as a player option, it must be valid. In other words, it must be a path that we can actually follow, given the story state, to a target element. A final word on option paths. As we see here, paths either returns the valid paths, an array of the valid paths, or if there are none, then it returns null. So enough theory, let's get back to our game script. If the paths is not null, that is, if there are actual options for the player, for every option we create an option button. Well, note that this line here is redundant because we already know that paths returns either null or an array of valid paths. To create the buttons, we call createButton function, and we pass the path as its argument. So when we actually create the button, we can get the text from the path's label, because path actually knows what is the valid label that it's supposed to be using. This comes from the plugin. And we connect the pressed signal, which binds the onOption button pressed method here. And what happens when we press the button is that we call the story class's selectPath method with the path as argument. Now the selectPath method what it does is it follows the argument path until its target, it executes any Arc script in the way, and then it updates the current element, which now is the target element. And then this is where the game turn restarts with repaint. Let's now quickly go through our UI buttons. So we have our refresh and restart. When we press the restart button, we obviously reload the current scene. The refresh button updates the Arcweave node's story. This is done by calling the update story method of the Arcweave node, which fetches the data in whatever method we've set our Arcweave asset to do so. What's important to know is that when the story finishes updating, the Arcweave node emits the signal project updated, which we mentioned at the start of our script. And then this method is called onProject updated, And what it does is it calls repaint again. Finally, we have the menu for saving and loading. So when we press the menu, there's a check here to see whether we have any saved file. Otherwise, we have to disable the load button. And then we can click either the save or the load button and save or load the game. Now, save game opens a file and then calls the story class's method getSave, while the load game opens that file again and then calls the story method loadSave. Now let's have a look at these two methods quickly and see what they do. We go to our story script. Now getSave, actually, this is what it does. GetSave, it saves the current element, the variable state, and the state of the visited elements. And this is what we get with a load save. So yeah, this is what you have to remember, that in order to save the story state, you need the current element, so you know where you are in the story, the variable state, so whatever changes have happened, they also need to be stored, and the state of the visits, that is, what elements have we visited. Well, that was it for this episode, showing how we can create a simplified play mode implementation in Godot for running simple interactive fiction. In the next episode, we'll use a more sophisticated project to demonstrate dialogue with NPCs, inventory items, character stats, and fetching via Arcweave's web API. If you find these tutorials helpful, please subscribe to Arcweave's official YouTube channel. You can find us, the Arcweave team, hanging out on our Discord server, and of course you can follow Arcweave on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm Yanis from Arcweave, thank you for watching, and let the games begin.